Hello, and welcome to our fourth week focusing on Christmas for Awakened. You've heard the birth narrative in the Gospel of Luke, where the Holy Family travels to Bethlehem for a census and then Jesus is born and placed in a manger. You've heard the birth narrative in the Gospel of Matthew, where the Holy Family is visited by the Magi and then they have to flee down to Egypt as refugees. But have you heard the birth narrative where, as Jesus is being born, he's almost devoured by a seven-headed red dragon? No? It's in there, I promise, but perhaps not surprisingly, it is not found in the Gospels. It's found in the ever weird book of Revelation. I really enjoy this birth narrative and love the book of Revelation, especially when it's understood in its proper context. Now, a lot of 21st century American Christians think that the purpose of the book of Revelation is to predict a coming apocalypse. But that's not what it's about at all. The book of Revelation was written by this guy named John, who was exiled on the island of Patmos in the midst of Roman persecution. So he had seen his friends, his loved ones, die at the hands of Romans. And so he wrote an anti-imperial text. But you couldn't just write an anti-imperial text in the first century Roman Empire. So he had to get creative about it and used a lot of coded language to hide what he was talking about, but it would have been clear to first century Jesus followers reading this text what he meant. This story, Jesus' birth narrative in the book of Revelation, is an anti-imperial text at its heart, and to understand it, we really need to look to Greco-Roman mythology, particularly the Greek god Zeus. So Zeus came down to earth, as he was wont to do, and had sex with Leto. She got pregnant, and she was giving birth to their son, Apollo, the god of light. But as she was giving birth to Apollo, there was this giant monster, Python, who was waiting to devour Apollo. Zeus comes in at the last moment and he saves Leto and Apollo and brings them to safety. Now, John takes this story and applies it to Jesus. Why? Well, in John's version, listen to this first. John says that Mary is pregnant, not Leto, of course, and she's giving birth to Jesus. And it is not Python, but a seven-headed red dragon that's waiting to devour Jesus. The seven-headed red dragon is Rome. We know this because Rome was the city of seven hills, and red was the color of Roman legions. It is Rome that's waiting to devour Jesus, and thus Jesus' followers. Look, there are several things symbolically important that are going on here. One of the most important is, you'll remember that I told you that whenever Jesus' followers confessed that he was the Son of God, that was a very controversial and political thing to do, because that title was already taken. There was already a Son of God, the Emperor. But the Emperor wasn't just a son of any god. The Emperor was the son of Apollo, the god of light, the one who this birth narrative is about. And so John takes the story of a birth narrative in Caesar's family and then applies it to Jesus. And Apollo is about to be devoured by a monster. But John points out, by appropriating the story, that Rome has now gone from being saved by a monster to being the monsters that are devouring Jesus' followers. Woo! What's more, Apollo was the god of light. By taking his story and applying it to Jesus, John says that it is Jesus who is the true light, not Apollo and thus the Roman emperor. This is a really clever story, and I love reading this, especially in this context, because we see this anti-imperial notion of early Jesus followers who put Jesus at odds with the Roman Empire from the very beginning of his life. Jesus certainly ended up speaking the truth and love to the principalities and the powers throughout his ministry, and was at odds with the Roman Empire because he was proclaiming loyalty, allegiance to God and to the reign of God over loyalty to the Roman emperor and the Roman Empire. Jesus' followers, when they confessed that he was the Son of God, they were saying that they saw God through Jesus and not through Caesar. That they were following the reign of God and not the Roman Empire. That the Roman Empire that achieved peace through conquest and violence was not a strategy that was compatible with the reign of God, because the reign of God achieved peace through the presence of love and justice. And Jesus' followers said that they placed their loyalty in love and justice. Love is what Jesus' message is about at its heart. We hear over and over again that God is love, and that our call as Jesus followers is to love one another as God has first loved us. And so the heart of the Christmas story, perhaps this one in particular, is that we are called to love one another and to build God's reign on this earth through love and through light. This week, we'll light our final candles on our Advent wreath. We'll light the candle of love and think about where we have experienced love in our lives. And we will also light the center candle, the Christ candle, the Jesus candle. And perhaps as we light that this week, we can take special note of the fact that the Roman emperor's divine father was said to be the God of light. And yet Christians confess that it is Jesus who is the light of the world, calling us to be a city on a hill that all can see. That it is the light of love that shines in the darkness, and that the darkness shall never overcome. May it be so. This week, we light the candle of love. We think about all those places in our lives where we are currently experiencing the most love, recognizing that God is love. God is love, and where we see God in our lives is where we are experiencing love. We are also cognizant of those places in our life and in our world that deeply need love. May this world find the love that it desperately needs. I invite you, as you're turning to your Advent wreath, to light the last blue candle, the candle of love. God of love, we know that you have called us to love ever more deeply and to rejoice in your love, knowing that when we need to discover you, we just look to love. May that love rule our hearts and enliven our lives. May it be so. Amen. I also encourage you now, or on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, to also turn towards the white candle in the center, the Christ candle, representing the birth of Jesus. As we turn to this candle, we recognize that Jesus' teachings are a light for our lives. That Jesus' teachings teach us how to live and teach us how we can experience God in our lives. And so we give thanks as Jesus followers for his life, for the light that he is to us, and the encouragement he gives us to be a light of love and hope and peace and joy for all this world. We give deep thanks for the Prince of Peace, the one who taught us how to make this world a deeply compassionate, justice-filled place. May we work each day of our lives to help bring about the reign of God on this earth that Jesus talked about each day of his ministry, ever so passionately calling us to be a part of it. May it be so. Amen.